AZ Wildcats podcast brought to you by DraftKings, America's #1 sportsbook app with John Schuster, Ben White. I am merely Mike Luke. All right, lots to get to today. But first thing I want to say is UCLA is a really, really good basketball team, and this was a great win for the University of Arizona, John Schuster.
Arizona's two most significant games played at McKale Center. Against Tennessee and against UCLA, Arizona came out victorious playing the other team's style. The Wildcats scored 58 points today. The Wildcats scored 58 points today and won the game. And other than a complete meltdown in the last minute, which is indicative of UCLA's toughness and probably a concern for Arizona as things move forward, Arizona controlled, 18 and a half minutes of the second half.
Right.
And so for all of the frustrations that Arizona has had over the course of the last 3 weeks, understandably, for all of the concerns about Arizona going up against athletic teams, especially on the wings, that can be a problem, Arizona has shown as well that it can win in a variety of styles. The Cats can win their own way. They can win in a half-court game against Tennessee when Tennessee is able to make it a half-court game and limit transition opportunities. And they can win UCLA style as well. And that being in that kind of position and showing that there's an ability to do those sorts of things makes Arizona a difficult foe come NCAA tournament time. I think a lot of UCLA fans are understandably going to say, man, we had a horrible shooting night. And it's clearly true. Mm-hmm. But Arizona's defense was very impressive, probably as good as it's been all year. And it was enough to make things difficult on UCLA, which struggles on the offensive end at times. And Arizona was able to get a legitimate, grinding, hard-fought W that I think will have more physical contact than the two NFL playoff games that take place later today.
You know, we're going to get to that in a second here, Ben, but one thing that I got to give Tommy Lloyd a ton of credit for, and the comments coming in hot and heavy, appreciate all you. We're going to get to all of these very quickly. But, man, he made a real adjustment there in that second half. That first half, Azuolas Tubelis looked a little bit like the Azuolas Tubelis of last March, where missing layups, looked a little uncomfortable, didn't really know what he was doing. And then Tommy Lloyd essentially put the ball in his hands through the pick and roll. And UCLA didn't have an answer for that, especially when when Tubelis would roll to the basket. It was a simple move, but it was a move that I think paid real dividends.
Yeah, I think when you look at all of Arizona's big wins so far, and this is no different in the sense that there's always that one key adjustment, I feel like, in the second half that propels them over to the finish line. And Tubelis certainly was the example of that today. You know, I thought he was really effective in the pick and roll as a screener, and you just got a little bit more creative with him. And I think one important thing that we have to take away from just the way that Arizona played in that second half and the way that they were able to turn things around is you were able to see consistent play and good play out of the guards. This wasn't going to be a game where Tubelis and Ballo were going to be just enough, I think, to win you the game. I think, obviously, from a physicality standpoint, you pack the paint. You know, UCLA had no answer from the outside. They were not able to make anything happen from a shooting perspective. But at the same time, that physicality wears on you. So who was that one guy to step up? Who has been that one guy maybe lacking in the guard spot that we've talked about for a couple of weeks? And that's somebody tonight in my mind was Courtney Ramey. 11 points, 3 for 5 from 3, especially.
And they were timely threes.
They were timely threes as well. Very, very efficient offensively. So Arizona really put it all together, and certainly one of their most complete games of the season. And now you look at their resume too. I think from a seeding perspective, this makes all the difference in the world. It certainly propels them from the rest of the season. But now you've got wins over number 5 UCLA, number 6 Tennessee, number 14 Indiana, number 10 Creighton, and number 17 San Diego State. It's a pretty damn impressive resume so far.
That's very impressive. We'll talk more about that as well. Thoughts on the refs today? We'll get to that. I thought it was an interesting refereed game for sure. But this was also a game too where you got to look at it. And the first half, Arizona, and maybe this is where they're maybe a little bit better. We're going to get to your question for Schu here in just a second. But Arizona just didn't really look the part. And Arizona at the end went into halftime up. And we've talked about this a great deal of times during all of our post-game shows. And Sean got a question here for Schu. Do we only step up if we play teams in the top 10? And we've talked about that, though, guys. It does feel like this team essentially plays to its level of competition. And when you're playing top 10 teams, that's a good thing.
I believe when it is a good thing in that regard. I believe when we go back, there's two prongs to that question as we study this a little bit more retrospectively. One of them is the very real possibility that Arizona has motivation issues. And part of that motivation issue is a relative lack of understanding still that other teams view Arizona in higher regard than I think a lot of players on this roster recognize. Arizona,
I think that's a good point.
The players understand that Arizona's a good school to go to, but I don't know if they recognize the lineage behind that, where you're looking at a lot of teams that come into here that are won in their last 13 at McHale, that are, and this stacks up pretty consistently. You can find a whole heck of a lot of examples in this conference that line up that way. Arizona beats most teams in this league, and they've been a top tier team in this conference for most of the last 30 years.
Right.
As a result of that, teams recognize that Arizona is a big game on the schedule, just as teams recognized in the 70s that UCLA was a big game on their schedule. And
do you think that's some of the international? Do you think that's some of the international factor, though, Schu?
Probably, yeah. That and part of that probably plays in a couple ways. I think there may be there's certainly a lack of regional understanding that probably goes into recognizing how important everybody else views Arizona, and what it is like to play in the favorite role. And from a secondary standpoint, I think you're also dealing, you're dealing with, as you noted, that international aspect where you just don't know it very well. You might also be dealing with a little, I don't want to say it's laissez-faire. I don't want to say they are anti-competitive. They don't care. Clearly, all of those things aren't right. But there's sometimes a different level that maybe Arizona struggles to work its way through. That's one issue. And let's deal with the second issue now. I think from a retrospective standpoint, Ballo not being 100% is going to look like we're going to go back and look at, wow, Arizona had that problem in the season when Ballo wasn't as healthy as we recognize.
Right.
And when he gets to that point, it provides such a difficult template for a lot of other teams at the college basketball level when he's 90% or better, that it just makes things so much more difficult. And today it made things difficult on the defensive end. Ballo had good numbers too. He got Bona into foul trouble, even when, and this is a tough thing. We've talked about this a little bit too. Arizona relies on Tubelis being the best player on the floor. Today, right, in the first half, especially, Tubelis had a bad first half. Struggled, rushed. Frankly, Tubelis' first half offensively was like everybody else's first half too. Let's not pretend anybody had a good offensive performance today.
Right.
But this was that game where Tubelis couldn't quite get those shots to go, rushed a little bit, was banged around a lot, and was just a little bit off his game. But Ballo was there to help and to complement. And it kept Arizona close and played a role in giving Arizona advantage. When you have two guys on the inside with that skill set, it is a distinct difference. And I think in the last 3 weeks, Arizona's had 1.5. And that is maybe a major difference between Arizona being able to level off some of those matchups that they played poorly and just getting blown out of the gym in one of them, at least in the Oregon matchup.
There were two. I wanted to go there, and that's why John Schuster, I consider him my mentor, because you know what? He went in a direction that I was going to go in next. But two things. First of all, 4 peaks. If you've been watching the game, it's been basically cut down to 2 peaks right now for the U of A, but that doesn't mean that 4 peaks isn't still the official brew of PHNX Sports in Tempe, or you can go to the Tap and Bottle location. Check it out, 4 Peaks. Enjoy responsibly. Check out the show notes and the link in the description. And then more furniture. Here's the deal. MORfurniture.com. Everybody the PHNX hires except for me is very tall. Shane Diefenbach behind the scene right now is about 6'6". Jacob Franklin is only 6'8". I am not that big. But you know what? More Furniture has the same kind of furniture for both of us right there. Check out the show notes and the link in the description. Check it out right there. Good stuff. Okay, now let's talk about Oumar Ballo. A couple things. First of all, you could tell in the second half, Jay Billis made this point a bunch of times. And I think the first thing that Arizona did not guard UCLA's 5-man at all. Basically dropped Ballo into the middle, and that really clogged things up for UCLA right there. Thought that was a very good move. Second of all, with Ballo, sometimes you get guys that are just really, really country strong, and they kind of wear on you as the game goes on. That's what Ballo, I think, does. Watching him in the first half against Bona, you could tell Bona's going to be a player. You can tell. He very much has that Oregon-type feel to him. But Ballo is just so much bigger, and as the game goes on, guys get worn down a little bit. They get tired, especially the ones right there that are new to the game. I thought that was an interesting attrition by Ballo right there, and I also thought it was an interesting move by Tommy Lloyd right there, Ben, to basically say, yeah, we're not going to guard the 5-man unless he comes into the basket.
Yeah, I mean, it was a brilliant game plan. I mean, it was obvious from the get-go. Bona had, I think, 2 fouls in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the game, and at that point, you knew that there was going to be a discrepancy there. So, but I mean, that's Arizona's exact game plan, and I think that goes back to a little bit when we talk about, does this team only get up for big games? I think there's an aspect of it, and you didn't necessarily see it tonight, but I think there's just also we got to remember. Tommy Lloyd and Sean Miller are 2 very different coaches. I think there's a philosophy difference in the sense that Tommy Lloyd knows. Yeah, no joke, right? Tommy Lloyd knows that when you have guys like Tubelis and Ballo who can just stuff the paint and just be one of the best front courts in all of college basketball, and as you kind of progress through that Pac-12 season where you're playing the Wazoos of the world, you're playing the Oregon States of the world, I think you have a little bit of a different agenda in the sense that you've got some unknowns, a lot of unknowns on the guard side. You've got to be shifting guys in and out of the lineup. So if there's a stretch, 2-3 minutes in the second half against Oregon State where we want to tweak a lineup, we want to throw Larson in there, we want to get Boswell, the young kid, in there a little bit to see how he looks. I just think there's a little bit of a different expectation level. And when you mix that in with a young team, sometimes you're playing with fire, obviously, and we've seen that. But I think you go through those growing pains and you go through those moments because when you play a team like UCLA, you're obviously able to put it all together. And you saw that tonight. So,
with Arizona now moving forward, though, I think we know some things about certain players. And I want to talk a lot about Pelle Larsson right here. Pelle does overall. I'm wrong. I was wrong on Pelle. So that needs to be said. I thought last year, I'm like, man, this guy, my bad Pelle has become a hashtag movement on Twitter, not like the back the A movement, but a hashtag movement. Here's what we know about Pelle. He's a pretty good defender out there, and his strength, his versatility allows him to be able to guard some different positions. If he's just taking 1 or 2 dribbles to the basket, he can generally do a pretty good job of setting up other players, finishing around the basket. But what we also know at this point, too, is, man, UCLA, and I had a couple people messaging me this, UCLA was hoping at the end of the game that Pelle Larsson was going to get the ball. There was a reason that Pelle Larsson was wide open there whenever UCLA was trapping. And that's something that Arizona's got to figure out there, especially if he's going to play, if he's going to be playing crunch time minutes, which I think he is, Schu.
Well, let's break down the last minute and a half because it's going to be important. Remember, Arizona had an 11-point lead, and this thing looked like it was all but sealed. And then UCLA, as impressive as they are a tough, gritty team with 2 or 3 guys on the roster who just win. You don't necessarily understand how, but they just get it done. And they almost got it done today in a game that in the last, 8 minutes or so really had no business being in. But in that last second, you can rightfully pick on Larsson, who threw the lazy pass to Kriisa that got stolen and turned into a bucket. But Kriisa made a bad pass as well. Ramey caused a turnover, and Boswell created a 5-second turnover.
Right.
So the entirety
for sure
of Arizona's backcourt. So it's easy to pick on Larsson here, but Larsson's 1 of 4. and one of four of a larger problem that Arizona has to fix. And in these situations, I think the play that became controversial on the goaltend is probably how Arizona needs to approach this stuff when teams trap them. The safety valve here is Tubelis. Tubelis is the most physical guy, I think, in terms of handling the ball on Arizona's roster.
Yes.
And at 6'11", he can handle the ball reasonably well. He can also be a safety valve in the middle of the floor that then allows other people to try. He can kind of gauge traffic a little bit until things mellow out to some degree. Then you can get back to Creasa, you can get it to Larson, you can try to set Ramey, you can try to set something else in that regard. Arizona failed to go to Tubelis in those minutes. Now, I also understand that the issue with that is Tubelis isn't the best free throw shooter, but if I'm running a press offense against another team that's really trying to get active in that regard, and Arizona's going to see this eventually and certainly see it at some point in the tournament, then Tubelis is the guy who I want to get the ball to, and then I work through him to try to figure it out. And additionally, I want to go to the basket too. I'm attacking the damn basket. I'm not messing around with we're trying to milk clock. If teams are pressing you, you don't have the ball handlers at this stage to be physical enough and comfortable enough, whether they're not tall enough, whether the passes are lazy, whether they're not physical enough, whatever that dynamic is, either Arizona's got to figure that out from a practice standpoint, or they need to approach things differently. And to me, approaching things differently is going to the rack. And in that situation, it was, just that possession near the end where they reversed the goaltend was such a mess because Tubelis had an opportunity, lost the ball, then Larson gets it back, and there was a lot of time looking as to whether the call was goaltending or not. The referees got the goaltending call right. The part they got wrong was that Larson got mauled and should have been at the line taking 2 free throws. But that was, that was something they didn't get navigated. And then Arizona was ultimately good enough to be able to weather the storm. But they had, 5 consecutive possessions that got UCLA back in the game. And again, it wasn't just Larson who threw a lazy pass. It was Creasa who got turned over. It was Ramey who got turned over. And it was Boswell who got turned over. So that's something that they have to navigate. It's up and down the line, and it's a problem.
All right, I think Saul basically is echoing your point right here. And Saul Bookman comes with credibility right here, everyone. I'm going to say this again. The leading free throw shooter in the history of AIA basketball. My boss, Mr. Saul Bookman. He doesn't like me telling it, but what that means is I'm going to keep telling it. So again, Saul knows what he's talking about right here. But, he says you have to be aggressive versus press breakers. You can't break a press and hold the ball. You're asking for disaster. That's exactly what's going on there, Ben, in that, okay, let's get the ball across half court and then just hold it there. Because you know what the defense wants you to do? They want you to hold it right there. They want to be able to come over and double team you because there's a good chance you're going to panic. There's a good chance that something is going to happen. And they got to figure that one out. So like Schuster and Saul are saying, you've got it. By the way, that's a great name, Schuster and Saul.
We're detectives.
Detectives, yes.
I don't know which one's playing bad cop. I have a pretty good idea.
Right, but Ben, you're asking for disaster by saying I need you to be aggressive and then hold the ball. That's what the defense wants you to do.
Yeah, I mean it's that simple. And with Arizona, you've seen it today. You've seen it with more physical teams. You saw it last year in the tournament at times with Houston. Obviously, a much different situation. But yeah, Arizona was playing not to lose, and when you play not to lose in crunch time, 3 to 4 minutes left in this type of situation, that's just what's going to happen. So I'd imagine this week in practice, that's probably going to be something that they drill a lot on when it comes to pressing and breaking in those situations. But yeah, it's inexcusable. Arizona was playing with fire at that time. And, again, it's the makeup of the team possibly, but it also comes with just a lot of inexperience and youth. And
if I may, I think there are a couple other things going on here. One of which is that when you have guards handling the ball in the backcourt and just past the half court line, what you're trying to do or what you're anticipating is that the other team is going to foul you and put you to the foul line. And so the people who you want handling the balls are the better foul shooters. So that's why Creasa's got the ball and Larson's got the ball, et cetera. And maybe Tubelis doesn't. It has, I think, a lot to do with the strategy of trying to figure out, they're not going to go for the steal necessarily. The thought process is they're going to try to foul you and get you to the line and hope that, you can play the foul shot game. Clearly that didn't work today. UCLA's strategy was better and put Arizona on the defensive. The second aspect here is that Tommy Lloyd plays math within the last 5 minutes of a game. And this is why
How so?
You'll see Arizona try to take a little bit more time off the clock and then run something with about 10 seconds left in its offensive possession. And what Lloyd is doing is he's basically running math formulas. We're up 11. If we can milk 20 seconds on this 20 to 25 seconds on this possession with 5 minutes to go, whether we get a basket or not, they're going to have to come down the other way. It's going to be 15 seconds left. We're going to get the ball again with 4:15, leading by 9. And then we're going to get the ball again, leading by 7 with 3.
So you're basically plotting it out then, and what's going to happen, right?
And this is what Lloyd does. And it may be something that he has to navigate a little bit more. Because had Arizona been a little bit more aggressive, I think in the last minute and a half, I think there were opportunities there to try to, get a couple extra buckets that may have made this a little bit more comfortable. All that said, again, Ben's absolutely right, and so are you and Saul in regards to Arizona's lackadaisical approach in the backcourt to expect the team to do something when the reality was something else entirely, and it got Arizona kind of out of rhythm and made this game a heck of a lot more interesting down the stretch than it needed to be.
Saul is always welcome on the post-game show, being that he is my boss, Patrick. So Saul knows he's got an open invite right there. Real quick, and then I want to talk a little bit about the officiating because I thought it was very Pac-12-ish. Have I told you guys about the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX?
I hope you will now.
Got nothing.
Ben, have you heard about this? You're in California, but have you heard about it?
I got nothing. You better tell us.
All right, here's the deal. You can put down $5 on an NBA game, and you can just $5, and you can get up to $200 in free plays if you're a new customer. Think about that for a second. How cool is that? Now, you might say to yourself, who should I bet on? Well, don't listen to what we have to say because whoever Schuster and I tell you to bet on generally doesn't work. So go and find a favorite, bet on that heavy favorite, and then get that $200 in free plays. Check out the show notes and the link in the description. Again, 21 and up, Arizona only. Gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP and Tap and Bottle. The place to be for all the official away game watch parties or the unofficial, is Tap and Bottle. Anthony Humbert goes there. KB Thiel goes there. John Schuster's presence has been requested for an autograph, so that means he'll be there.
But only one autograph.
Multiple autographs. Ben White has been there as well. Scott and Rebecca do a great job. We'd love to come see you. Got another one coming up in a couple weeks. So again, would love to see you up there. And Four Peaks is being served there as well. All right, the officiating to me was very Pac-12-ish in that you're let a lot of plays go, and then every time Cedric Henderson is around somebody, you basically call a foul. Schuster, I mean, we've watched this a lot. There was just no consistency, I felt, basically in the game.
I think
you like the officiating.
No, I didn't like the officiating. I think.
Oh, I see what you're going with.
There's going to be some hedging here. If you're a fan of both teams, I think you can have plenty of calls that were frustrating. But this was, generally speaking, it's one of those matchups where the ticky-tack stuff gets frustrating. The offensive rebound situation with Henderson, where Jaquez got on the inside, was not a good call. But there were a lot of non-calls in this matchup. This was as physical a game as I've seen Arizona play in some time. Yeah. And the way that the officials decided to call this game was beneficial to UCLA, at least theoretically. But in some ways, it played to Arizona's ability to, at least on the inside, to have an advantage because they've got the height thing working in their favor.
One thing that I did notice I noticed this about Ballo today, and I don't want to give any inside secrets, but Ballo is interesting because when he braces under the basket, first of all, he's very good at it. He travels almost every single time he does it. There's always a pickup of the foot. There's always a drag. It's generally never a clean play, but I think it's a little bit like the Richard Sherman thing with Seattle back in the day where, well, what are you going to do? Just call it every single time down the court like Seattle would say with their Legion of Doom or whatever. It's interesting though because there's a lot of travels that aren't called, but he also gets fouled a lot. And plays that aren't called as well. It's a little bit of that Shaquille O'Neal thing where, every time down the court, you're kind of fouled, but officials just aren't going to call that one there, Ben. Am I an idiot or Or do you want to be like John Schuster and jump in right there and say, yes, Mike, you are an idiot?
You are an idiot, but you're actually right on this. How about that?
Take it.
No, I think with Arizona, you look at the matchup, and I just think from the get-go, you knew it was going to be kind of that nasty game in the front court. And to me, the only questionable calls, just to reiterate what you said, were just some of those on Ramey. I mean, on the offensive rebound, he didn't even touch Jaquez. So that was kind of a phantom call, and just a couple of other ones down the stretch. But with all of that said, though, I think one of the key things and key areas that really helped Arizona in this game when it came to the officiating was they were able to get to the free throw line 20 times, and unlike UCLA, they were able to make the majority of their free throws. It really helped them get Ballo, and I think somebody like Tubelis, a little bit more comfortable in the second half, in the sense that, Tubelis was able to play his game. They were able to screen him off the high-low, and things just looked a little bit more fluid at that point. So I think from an officiating standpoint, yeah, you had some weird calls here and there, but I'm not going to nitpick too much at it. I thought it was just one of those games where it was going to be played, obviously, in the half court, and it was just going to be very physical.
But it felt like, didn't it feel like a 90s Big East game?
It really did. It felt like it was UConn Georgetown or something like that, where you've got 3, 7-foot big guys, and basically it's going to be a battle of attrition. It did feel like that, but then they would come in with the odd ticky-tack calls, and the odd ticky-tack calls weren't just like a 1 or a 2 minute type thing. They were kind of sprinkled in throughout the game, which kind of eliminated some of the flow. Real quick, though, I will say this. I've actually had somebody tell this. Rudy Bustillos, a lot of people think that he is an ASU troll in here brought in to make fun of me. Well, he is brought in to make fun of me, but he is a U of A fan. He's a good buddy of mine. So again, no need to message me about who this Rudy guy is, because I get that from time to time. Good dude. But I did feel like that, though, Schu, that this was essentially a game where, you're going to let him play. That's cool. But what Arizona did do, and we got to get to this, Jaime Jaquez, in my opinion, is one of the 2 best players in the conference. I think Azuolas Tubelis is that conference player of the year. Jaquez, though, to me is right. He's right after that. Arizona did a very good job. Arizona did a very good job of basically making him take his fadeaways. There could be some fadeaway, and again, that's part of his game right there. But at the same time, he also, he didn't make them. And, if UCLA was going to win this game, they needed a big performance out of him, and they didn't get it.
This is probably the point of the game, is that Larson's defense on Jaquez may have been the difference maker. Yeah. And that was what helped, I think, to spearhead Arizona's defense overall. Henderson played well against Jaquez as well. Frankly, up and down the roster today, if you got one team that scored 58 and another team that scored 52, you ought to be talking a lot about good defense. And we had plenty of it today. You've got shooting percentages that are in the low 30s for both teams. Yeah. But what Larson and, to a lesser degree, Henderson were able to do to negate the effectiveness of Jaquez, who I agree with you. I think he's one of the 2 better players in this conference, and I wouldn't trade him for anybody in this league. Right. His toughness factor is outstanding to have. The guy just wins. He and Tyger Campbell on the same roster, it's not hard to see why UCLA wins a bunch of basketball games. And they're going to be a pain in the backside in the tournament, because there aren't a lot of teams like Arizona who have 2 bigs. Right. Which is, I think, UCLA's that and the ability to score consistently are UCLA's weaknesses. But the Bruins play vicious defense, and the way that they hedge on the screen at the top, on the pick at the top, just makes things really difficult. Their ability to play D, their fundamentals on that end of the floor, very impressive.
You know what? I also got to say that
hard today.
Arizona, this game scared me a little bit, the start of the game, because they obviously thought they were going to, put Azuolas Tubelis on Jalen Clark. And it felt like Jalen Clark was going to be able to kind of get what he wanted in that game. Now, again, he finished with he finished with a lot of rebounds. We're going to talk about the rebounding here in a little bit. But he scores their first 6 of their 8 points or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know. This might be a tough matchup for Tubelis. But he didn't really do much after that. So, again, maybe that's why I'm here, Ben, and Tommy Lloyd is doing what he does.
Maybe, just maybe. But no, I think with UCLA, Jaquez was going to be a guy. I mean, did he have a great game? No, but he also still had, 12 points. I mean, from the sense that, you look across the board. I mean, UCLA had a pretty balanced effort, but like Schuster said, it just came down to the defense in the end. Jaquez was a guy, I think, in the first half who was able to get a couple of good looks. I mean, he was making every shot from the elbow there for a little bit, but slowing him down in the second half, whether it was Larson, who I think made the biggest difference, but even guys like Boswell and, Henderson as well, different guys that they threw at him. The key, I think, is, UCLA just wasn't able to get inside. And, I think as important as Jaquez is to this team, they're also a team that likes to play from the inside out, in the sense that they've got to have a presence in the paint to be able to get some points to get them over the hump when they slow teams down and play press defense and wear teams out and all that good stuff. And I think tonight they just weren't able to do that. And while Jaquez was effective in the first half, he really wasn't all that effective in the second half. Ramey, Larson, excuse me. And, Arizona's guards just.
It's okay, Glenn. Ben.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Had the advantage in the second half. So, again, I just think it comes down to kind of a case by case basis. And as good as Jaquez is, and as many problems as he creates, when you have no inside game, and when you have Bana, not available for most of this game due to foul trouble, it really makes an impact on the way they play. And you saw that today. The rebounding
was a little bit of a cause for concern for me, though. You come out of a game against a team that you're also bigger than, and you give up 16 or 17 offensive rebounds. It did come back to bite Arizona today, but that's certainly something you got to clean up, because that's an alarming number right there, Schu.
This is the reason that Arizona is going to lose at Poly if you get a number like that in the rematch. That's because UCLA is not going to shoot this poorly from the field at home. And if you give up off, that's a rarity for Arizona. Arizona was tough defensively, but there were two areas, I think, that UCLA's physicality was able to exert itself. And that was certainly in the last minute and a half, where the defense immensely stepped it up, and on the glass, especially on the offensive glass. What'd you say, Mike? It was 16 offensive rebounds?
Yeah.
We haven't seen that a whole heck of a lot against a big Arizona front line this year. Usually Arizona rebounds pretty well. So some of the more bouncy teams that are out there who focus on rebounding, that's something that Arizona obviously has to clean up and do a much better job of. That would be the number that, if you look back, if this game went the other way, if UCLA shot it slightly better. Yeah. And again, Arizona didn't shoot the ball offensively. UCLA did a couple things, 2 or 3 things that I think it wanted to do. UCLA controlled the tempo. UCLA dominated the glass, and UCLA got good defensive presence in the last minute and a half of the game. The one thing UCLA wasn't able to do, to Arizona's credit, is make buckets. But if you look at some of those other numbers, those are the types of things that Arizona has to shore up, because as good as your defense may be, you're not going to allow 30% shooting all the time.
Right. Now, let's just say that you're Ben White, and you're living in a nice quaint place in California, upper class, and you're saying to yourself, man, I'd like to get to McHale, but I don't know how. And you know what? I don't know what the phone number is. I have the answer for Ben White right here. Here's the deal. Go to Game Time. And Game Time is the #1 sports ticket or sports concert ticket app. You name it, they've got it. And many times it's 60% off. Again, you might say, Mike, did you just say 60%? I did just say 60%. So again, check it out, the show notes and the link in the description. The best way to support us is by buying your tickets through the link in the description. And Mountain Mike's. Ben came in here the other day and said, Mike, Mountain Mike's is in California. I did not know that. That's why we have smarter people than me on the show. John Schuster has come in here before with a Mountain Mike's cup. Not just the cup. He actually consumed product there. And William Brad Alice has done this as well. Oracle and Wetmore, check it out. Great place to watch games. Food, drink, you name it. They got it. Check it out. Mountain Mike's Pizza. All right. Jay Billis said something that has been essentially, I never understand why this is said, and this happens all the time. He says he's talking about Arizona and UCLA. And let's be honest. These are 2 of the 10 best teams in the country. We watched a lot of college basketball. Wherever that you want to put them, cool. But they're 2
Hey, Mike, do you believe that? Do you believe that? Because a week ago, I think you said on one of these broadcasts that you didn't think Arizona was one of the teams that could win the national title.
Well,
has that changed now based on what you've seen at McHale this week, where you put Arizona into that upper tier that has an opportunity?
I think Arizona's in. Honestly, I think Arizona's in that second tier. I think there's somewhere between about 8 and 15, depending on the game. That somewhere in there. But my question, I guess, is, and that's a good call right there, Schu. My question, though, is Jay Billis says, well, Arizona and UCLA are two teams that are going to be battling for a number 1 seed, but obviously you can't give them both number 1 seeds. This is the only conference that has ever brought up about. He would never say that about the ACC. He would never say that about the Big 10 or the Big 12. And it struck me as odd, because the thing with Arizona's resume right now is this is close to a number 1 seed resume, in that you have it. That Tennessee win is a really good win. This UCLA win is a really good win. San Diego State's going to be a 4 or a 5 seed. They're already ranked. They won't lose again the rest of the season. Indiana, you name it. UCLA's obviously got a really good resume. Why is that a non-starter that, well, you just can't have 2 teams from the Pac-12? I hate that line of thinking, Ben.
Yeah, I have a couple theories. I think the first one is the obvious one. It's the bias, and I think it's, when you look at the great conferences out east and, in the Midwest, it's just also a numbers game too. And I think for whatever reason, there's always been this notion, at least, as I've been watching, and obviously Schuster can offer a little bit more historical context.
I mean,
but
the
it's always
Naismith era.
Yeah, exactly. But I just think there's always been this notion that, it's always, Gonzaga and, one Pac-12 team out west. And for whatever reason, we're just not open to having that discussion. We're just not open to having that conversation. And, to be fair, most years that kind of is how it shakes out. So a couple of different thoughts there. I mean, it's really how you look at it, Schu. I mean, from a historical perspective, what do you think?
Here's what I hope to read on some of the comments down there. And Dirty Dancer, I think a lot of what you say is accurate and plays into this. However, I would also hope to read, who knows if this is going to happen or not, Mike, you make an excellent point, either period or exclamation point in that regard. One of the
Not a question mark?
No, I think it's a statement. And I think it's a hard line statement of accuracy, no less. Yeah, if you just do this from a resume, whatever that means, standpoint, UCLA and Arizona are should be both in conversation for number 1 seeds. Kansas this week, who up until this week was in the conversation for number 1 seed and probably still is, has lost now twice to 2 very good teams, but they've lost now twice. UCLA lost its first game, since November, right, against an Arizona team that is ranked on the fringe of the top 10. Right. Losing at McHale shouldn't hurt your resume. Arizona, as you guys have noted, has beaten some very good teams and has a positive resume that can stack up favorably with anybody. I think you can make a favorable argument legitimately that this year, Arizona and UCLA are both in that conversation and theoretically could both be number 1 seeds. Obviously, a lot of basketball still to be played. A lot of ups and downs to take place and a lot of navigating to happen. But I think they're certainly both deserving to be in that conversation. And if you get 2 conference teams there, I think in the regular season, both of them have deserved it based on their respective resumes. Now, one of the things Ben noted, and I think Ben references this probably from the classic ESPN East Coast bias, but the comment that Dirty Dancer made, I think, has a lot of validity. This is a conference that doesn't have an effective recent history in terms of making great tournament runs.
Well, UCLA I agree with that. Schuster, I totally agree with that.
But I think that's part of the process when you're looking at this from a bias standpoint. You think of the Pac, whatever it is, the Pac X now, as being a conference that's a step back. So it takes you a little while to get up to speed. But that said, I understand why it's said, but I do believe that what you say is correct. That UCLA and Arizona both belong in that conversation.
Here's my issue, though, with it. It's totally cool to go off history, context, totally get it. Understand that. The Big Ten gets 12 teams in each year, and they all get bounced in the first round. And every single year, we hear the same thing. Well, you got to put 10 Big Ten teams in there. It's the best conference in college basketball. No, it's not. The Big 12 is easily the best conference. Shout out to the Big 12 guy on there. But that's what I don't get. There's this very convenient, the Pac doesn't make a lot of deep runs. Okay, but we're going to keep doing this with the Big Ten. That is the only thing that annoys me right there, Phil.
As it should. As it should. If you're playing the history game, you ought to be consistent with it. And if the Big Ten has sucked largely in the NCAA tournament, then, why are you giving them the benefit of the doubt and pretending that this year they're going to be great? I think it's a very fair argument. And it's difficult to view in the window of this year based on the eye test and based on the computers and based on the other information that's out there. But that's what you ought to do.
Right. I'm generally wrong on most stuff, but I did predict this sweep, this coming up.
I heard you do it. You know what else you predicted? And Kuda, man, you had a good day. I think you predicted straight on that Arizona was going to be a 1.5 favorite in this matchup. You had a good week.
While many said 6.5, some said 13.5. I stood resolute and I said 1.5 right there. So, but on a serious note, though, did this weekend show you anything? Did it? Obviously it did. But what did this homestand show you there, Ben White, and then John Schuster take that one next?
Yeah, I think what it really showed me is, regardless of the deficiencies, the pros and cons that we've talked about from Arizona this week in both games, I think when you look at today, if Arizona plays the way that they did in that 18-minute stretch in the second half, I legitimately think right place, right time, they can beat anybody in the country. I agree with you in the sense that they're probably in that 6 to 10 range right now, just based off what we've seen. But again, it's how you play in the moment. If you can dominate with those two bigs inside and dictate a team and basically beat UCLA at their own game in the half court, slow things down, score in the 50s, which Arizona, as we know, does not do at all. That's not their style. But if you can predicate and beat teams, at their own game, which what we saw today, it's got to make you feel good. And again, it goes back to the fact that this team just finds different ways to win. And we're at a point in the year where I think we're seeing it a lot earlier than we would have liked to have seen it last year. And it's just got to make you feel great. So yeah, the rebounding could have been better today. We got to clean things up in the last 3 or 4 minutes. We can't play scared. We can't, tighten that game the way we did. But, that comes with experience, and that comes with, in the moments in these games. So I think, to me, I'm not saying Arizona's winning the national title or anything like that.
But you're not saying it.
But I'm not saying it either. So that's kind of how I feel at this point.
Mike, who do you think's in the top tier?
Right now, I think Alabama is a very, very good team. They've caught my eye pretty much. They caught my eye pretty much immediately. I like them. I like their length. I like their scoring pretty much down. They got a freshman who's really good. Honestly, who I think's pretty much a top 5 team, and this is why I don't want to minimize this win. I think UCLA is one of the 5 best teams in the country. I think that they're right there. I don't love Kansas. The reason I didn't love Kansas, though, is because, first of all, they don't have much of a bench, and they're not very tall. They're not super dynamic. That worries me a little bit. Like I said, I don't know why I keep coming back to Alabama and UCLA as 2 teams that really, really impressed me. I love Texas. I thought Texas was the best team in the country, but obviously they don't have a coach now, which could be an issue. That's certainly not something that you want. Houston, to me, though, is still the one. If I just had to bet one team, I'm probably betting Houston. But what's weird about Houston, though, is that they go through large pockets where they don't score. You watch them and they can have a lot of, there's a lot of games where they're in the 60s because they're going 6-7 minutes without getting a field goal. But they're so athletic. Their guard pressure is fantastic. Generally, I think that kind of stuff wins in the tournament. Those are the teams, though, that really Alabama, Houston, Tennessee is another team. I know William Brad Alice disagrees with me on Tennessee. It would not surprise me in the least if Tennessee was in the Final Four. I think they're that good. And so you guys got some pretty good wins right there.
Yeah, it does. But one of the things that I think, and I don't disagree with that list at all.
You can.
And certainly there's probably another team or two here that you can talk about and put on, but blah, 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 blah. Generally speaking, yeah, I think that's a very fair list. 2 of those 3 I think are interesting. One we saw today in UCLA, the other in the Houston example, where they can go through pockets of inconsistency on the offensive end.
Right.
And this is one of the things that potentially benefits Arizona, despite scoring 58 today, is that Arizona has the potential with Tubelis and Ballo to be able to go inside fairly consistently and at least stem a run, meaning that they either get a bucket or get fouled and can maybe go to the foul line. So Arizona is a team that can often weather shooting 4 for 16 from 3-point range and do some other things, especially if they're healthy on the inside, that gives them an opportunity. One of the things I like based on today's performance, and again, as far as the rematch is concerned, there are a couple numbers you can look at, especially the rebounding number that we've talked about, that makes me feel like UCLA is going to win the rematch in Pauley. And like you, UCLA looks like a team that against height, they may have problems, but
they're long and they're
against a lot of other teams. Their defense plays, and they're going to be, and they've got two guys who make big buckets, and that's a great recipe to make a deep tournament run. But the benefit that Arizona has, again, is the ability to go inside with two guys, if they're healthy, who have the potential to score and either get to the line and maybe stem some rallies here and there. And that and one of the things that's different this year, potentially, than it was last year, is that Arizona rolled through a bunch of teams and then got into the tournament and didn't really have matchups against the styles of teams that gave them problems. At least this year, Arizona's played a bunch of teams that on paper give them matchup issues, some of which they've lost to. So it's not like Arizona goes into the tournament unfamiliar with a style that might be difficult for them, which is a much better example. Additionally, again, and their two biggest games, their two biggest examples of this took place at McHale. That's a huge difference. However, Arizona played Tennessee's style and beat Tennessee. Tennessee's legit. Arizona played UCLA's style and beat UCLA. UCLA's legit. Arizona can also play its own style and win. That's three different ways that you can go into the tournament against different styles of matchups and be a problem. And that's not a bad place to be, despite the frustrations that we've seen for much of the last 3 weeks.
All right, guys, before we sign off, what are your predictions tonight? We've got Shane Diefenbach behind there, wants our predictions since he doesn't want to step on. Arizona State, USC. I think Arizona State wins, but I want USC to win. How about that? What do we got?
That's certainly a prediction. This is a difficult one for me from an emotional standpoint. I think ASU is a better team, but ASU to me is a lot like Creighton. And what I mean by that is at the beginning of the year, Creighton came into the season ranked very high and then believed that it was legit, played against actual legit teams and couldn't get a win. And so as a result, they got demoralized, and it's taken them a while to try to get back on track. I feel like ASU is the same way, especially in this conference. ASU gets a lot of publicity, wins a lot of games, but then the reality is that in the Pac-X, it's UCLA and Arizona. Pick your order of that. ASU had 2 shots at those teams at home and couldn't get W's. So how demoralized are they going into the matchup against USC? I think that is the big test that Hurley
What's your prediction
tonight. I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna hedge this and drag this out a little bit more to annoy you. I'll go with ASU because USC didn't look. The USC is somehow 13-5 and didn't look particularly good to me at all the other night.
All right, what do you think there, Ben White?
I'll make it a lot more simpler. I'm going ASU simply because they watched U of A beat UCLA today and they're going to be pissed.
You know what actually is nice, though, and I'm going to actually give ASU one. It is nice having a travel partner that actually does a little bit to soften up the other team. I will give ASU that. That being said,
you could argue favorably that the amount of energy that UCLA expended in Tempe played a bit of a role in UCLA shooting 30% today.
I would suggest that you're right. On that note, everybody out there, really appreciate you all. We hit 145 lives. Always awesome. You guys are the best out there. You're smarter than us. Well, at least you're smarter than me. So that's why I appreciate you guys all making me out to be everybody out here to be awesome. Again, really appreciate you all. Shane Diefenbach, we're going to try to get Big Shane on here sometime. Doesn't sound like he wants to get on this game. But as always, back the A and go USC tonight. You have been listening to the AZ Wildcats postgame show.